Welcome to MSP Marketing Insights. I'm your co-host, Angus Robertson. I'm here with my other co-host, Maddie Bethany. Welcome, Maddie. Today, our topic is events and best practices for events when it comes to MSPs. In just a little bit, we'll talk about how MSPs can get started with events. But before that, Maddie, how are you doing? How was your week? Are you doing anything fun this weekend?
Week was good. This weekend, just relaxing, preparing for a weekend at Universal next weekend. So I feel like I like to do a chill weekend, crazy fun weekend, and sandwich back and forth like that. What about you? What are you doing this weekend?
Oh, that sounds fun. Yeah, I'm taking it easy, just hanging out with my daughter on Saturday, but then Sunday, flying to Tampa. So I'll be in your neck of the woods next week. I look forward to seeing the team.
Yeah, excited to see you.
So, Maddie, where do you think we should start? I know you're very passionate about events. We do close to 200 events a year here at ConnectWise, a whole range of events. We do everything from industry conferences to road shows to user groups to, of course, IT Nation 4 times a year. We just came off of IT Nation Europe. That was a really fun event. But where do you think we should start?
Absolutely. So I think events are very exciting. I know the MSP community loves events just in general, love getting to see MSPs out in the field. And MSPs are really excited about events typically for driving their own sales, which I think is amazing. And so I think where I always like to start with just anything that we do in marketing is what is the plan? So Angus, from a lead planning perspective, do you have any tips on how you typically see events working into lead planning?
Yeah, this is very simple, but it's taken me years to get to this point. I think mostly marketing when it comes to B2B or business to business, there's three main channels. You've got your events and all the different types of events. You've got your digital and all your different types of digital, whether it's paid social, paid search, organic social, like YouTube, all that sort of thing. And then you have your outbound campaigns, mostly your sales campaigns. And what we see as MSPs mature their go to market and grow their business, usually it's a lot of the founder or the owner hustling, right? They're getting out there, they're building their business, they're networking. So that's kind of the early days of a sales campaign. That's generally where a lot of MSPs start. And naturally, what we see happen next are these events, whether it's virtual or physical events. But from a lead planning standpoint, we always like to start with the events because events are something that's on the calendar that you have to work backwards from. Often it's an in-person event, so there's a lot of logistics that have to go along with it. And they become fairly predictable in terms of, based on the region, based on the topic, how many people you can get to sign up and go to that physical event. So there's some predictability there. And then you can layer in your digital, which also has some predictability and over time should be going up. And then when you look at your overall event calendar and month by month, week by week, quarter by quarter, how many leads you're generating, you can look for those gaps in your calendar and say, okay, that's where I'm going to put those outbound sales campaigns to fill in the gaps to make sure I can hit my monthly lead target.
Absolutely. I love that. And you can do the same with digital as well. So events are time-based typically. You've got those outbound sales campaigns. And then if you're maturing to the point where you can get into digital, you can also use that to fill a little bit of the gap.
Yeah, absolutely. So I know it can be challenging for MSPs when starting a whole new initiative, budget, resourcing, best practices. What can I expect in terms of performance? So what do you think, Maddie? What's a good way for MSPs to get started when thinking about an event strategy?
Yeah, absolutely. Typically what we recommend or see MSPs do is start with a webinar. The events in person are super fun, but there's also a whole lot of other logistical budget requirements, things like that go into that. So we find that if MSPs start with a webinar, they can kind of get their footing because a lot of the motions for recruitment, follow-up, you still need content, are the same, but there's no investment that you need to make there. And so it allows you a little bit more flexibility to see if you can do those recruitment efforts to get people there and if it's successful for you or not before you dump money into something. So from a webinar perspective, really where we always want to start is setting targets. So what does good look like when it comes to pre-event, what you're trying to get from a recruitment standpoint? Are you wanting to get 20 people there? Are you wanting to get 100 people there? That is going to change how you're going to recruit for the actual webinar or just event in general. So that is super critical. Also, really important to identify who do you want there in general, because that will power a lot of what you're going to talk about at the event. So are you targeting current customers who maybe are on a managed service contract, but they're not quite on your security services quite yet, and so you want to try to cross-sell into that? I think before I've talked about starting with your customers for email, I would do the same thing on events. Always start with those customers you have a opportunity with them from a white space perspective. So I definitely do that. Another thing that you'll have to do to start off for the webinar is building an event website. And whether you're doing that in person or a webinar, you're going to have that. You can start super simple with something like GoToWebinar or even Zoom if you want to. Teams, I've seen that done before. I think Teams has an option to do a little bit more of a webinar type of look and feel. So you can use essentially the tool that you already have. There's no extra budget required. So starting there, just making sure that you're pushing people to that, and then getting that email campaign out the door. Our partner program has a ton of options there. I know GlassHive has a ton of templates for webinar recruitment, event recruitment. So that's kind of already created for you. And once you've got that list, you can start recruiting for that and then monitoring. Okay, are we getting close to hitting our recruitment goals? If we want to get 20 or 100, if you want to get 100, you're at 5. You've got a lot more work to do. So we got to make sure we've got more emails going out. And you're really tracking that target to make sure that you're getting the leads that you're looking for.
Maddie, I think that's a great tip. So for MSPs that want to get into doing events on a consistent basis, virtual events are a great way to start because there's so much overlap between virtual and physical events, but there's a lot less risk in the virtual events and a little bit less effort. So risk, I mean, in terms of the money you put into it and making sure that enough people show up to make it worthwhile. When you think about events, whether they're in person or they're virtual events, how do you think about top of funnel versus middle of funnel? By top of funnel, I mean sort of brand building and awareness. So how to create engagement with the audience at the top of funnel versus middle of funnel, which is much more your audience is ready to buy and is looking at what kind of solutions they should be considering or choosing. How do you delineate between the two, or do you delineate between the two when it comes to either virtual events or in-person events?
Yeah, absolutely. I think you can do a ton of different things. If you're starting out with your first event or webinar, I always recommend top of funnel. So wanting to find a really broad topic that your prospects are going to be interested in. So say it's something like you want to sell a security service and people are not ready for that. Maybe you start talking about cyber insurance instead. And that's that hook that's relevant to them right now to get them through the door. One other little sneaky thing to potentially do is in the webinar content, you can always have that thought leadership up at the front, but then also try to find a way in the presentation to work it into your services and make it clear that they need to have cybersecurity services because there is risk or whatever it is in your messaging that you're pulling through. And I think another thing that you can also do to try to get that hook at the middle of funnel, like bottom of funnel, for someone to raise their hand is just ask at the end of the presentation do you want to learn more about cybersecurity services from our MSP in general? And then I think that gives you a really hot list to have your sales team follow up with on the back end. So kind of like a mix of both in content.
No, I completely agree. And this is a trap that's easy to fall into because we're always looking for the leads. We're always looking for the pipeline. It's so easy to over rotate to middle of funnel and just spam our audience, whether it's customers or prospects, with, "Hey, ready to buy? Ready to buy. What about now? Ready to buy?" Uh, and uh, instead, you're really not providing a lot of value. And if they're not in a buy cycle, if they're worrying about other things, you're just being pretty annoying. So what's challenging about top of funnel and brand building is it takes time and it's hard to measure. But what would you say is the right mix between sort of top of funnel and middle of funnel activities?
Yeah, I typically like, and I think we talked a little bit about this on social as well. We talked about how we want to do 80% of our activity is really focused on education and 20% is focused on the services side. I think there's a bridge that you can make between that. You don't have to go 80%. You could do 60% focused on top of funnel, really educating, trying to build your brand as a thought leader in the space about cyber insurance, about security compliance for certain industries that you service. Those kind of things will attract buyers to you. So that's really critical. And then there's almost like a 20% you can bridge between that top of funnel to the bottom of funnel, really in that middle of funnel section where you're talking about, okay, well, what kind of cyber services would you need? Not necessarily pushing yourself, but just like, how do you connect that top of funnel to the actual service? And then pushing like, okay, let's do I've seen a lot of people do a cybersecurity assessment or something like that to like pull even further. So it's still providing value across the entire funnel, but it's just taking the conversation to something that's super high level, down a little bit more into the service, and then even further down into something that's more of a capture type of element where you're getting into pipeline and they're ready to have that conversation about, for this example, we're going through a cyber service.
Yeah, and I think it's actually for most MSPs a competitive advantage to do more on the education, because we're human, and so our human nature drives us to try to sell, try to hit that lead target, try to hit that pipeline target. So 80% of your competitors out there are going to be focusing on middle of funnel. So and just people are driven to that. It's even here at ConnectWise that we get driven in that direction, and we have to keep resisting that, because at the end of the day, our job is to provide our customers or partners value. You have to just continue to focus on that. So if you as an MSP, as you build out your event strategy, and as Maddie suggested, focus mostly on education and best practices and providing value to your prospects and to your customers, as long as you're reaching that audience, you're engaging that audience, you're building the relationship with them. They might not buy from you right away, or they themselves might not buy from you, but they might refer someone else to you because they see that value, they see that understanding, and they see that reason to solve that problem. So that's an area where MSPs can actually set themselves apart from some of their other MSPs in the region. So Maddie, what should we move to next? What's something else that you think is really important? I know in our experience, what we've seen in terms of driving engagement, driving attendance, a lot has to do with the content and the speakers. So what are some of your thoughts or strategies there?
Yeah, absolutely. So I know we talked a little bit earlier about who we're targeting and who we want to have be there. The biggest tip that I can give from a content perspective is make sure that the content is relevant to the buyer. It is about the buyer. It is not about us and our services or the product we're trying to sell. Yes, we want to get there, but we also need to make sure that we're focusing on that buyer first and providing them value. So that is critical. What I would look at is, what is the target that you wanted to start with, which we were talking about the example of, okay, we have customers who have managed service contracts. We want to get them to add cyber. So how do we focus the content on something cyber, like we talked about a little bit, to really just get into and start building that awareness that we are a cyber expert. So cyber insurance, something like that. Where it gets a little bit tricky is, okay, how do you build that content out if you feel like, I'm not 100% sure how to talk about cyber insurance, or I'm not sure what I'm supposed to put together? There are a ton of presentations, at least from a ConnectWise perspective, and I'm sure a ton of other vendors, presentations that we have out of the box that we can give to MSPs that we have white labeled. So it has everything you need in there. It's essentially like an event in a box to leverage and have all of that talk track ready for you. Another really cool opportunity is just making sure you figure out who you want your speakers to be. So do you have a SME internally that can follow that talk track and really start to build up your thought leadership presence of your brand just in general? Do you also maybe not feel quite ready for that and you want to bring someone else on? There are a ton of industry experts out there that you could always invite to speak with you about a topic, and you could kind of do like an interview style and get your footing that way. We have some at ConnectWise that do webinars with our partners and are always available to have those types of conversations. So you really can get started pretty easily. And then just making sure you have that content filled out, you're figuring out how to get that content down into that service area at like for a small percentage of that. And then just making sure that you have a poll at the end to ask if anyone wants more information, especially if it's a webinar. If it's an event, you have time afterwards to capture people and have further conversations about the content, which is even better from an engagement perspective. But making sure that you have that CTA on a webinar is really critical. So that's what I would say just in general about content. You definitely need to also make sure that you can get people there, right? So we've talked a little bit about the recruitment side, but content overall is essentially what's going to get somebody into that conversation with sales on the back end.
Yeah, Maddie, looks like I blanked there for a second, but happy to be back. One of the, I think what you're talking about really resonates for me, and I've seen that. When I was working for a company that got bought by OneTrust later on, we weren't huge at the time. We were about 10 million in revenue, and we were selling to about our database of prospects is about 10,000. So any company that had more than 500 million in revenue. Mm-hmm. And one of the more successful virtual events we did, we managed to get 800 people to the webinar, and then another 2,000 downloads within 2 weeks of the ebook we produced as part of the webinar. And so much of that had to do with the topic and the speakers that we had. So we managed to get Microsoft and PwC to speak with us, even though we didn't have a very strong brand at the time. So we were leaning on their brands and their brand awareness and recognition. And then the topic, which is interesting because at two startups, this topic was a hot topic, even though it was different audiences. So the first startup, it was CFOs. The second startup, it was chief legal officers or chief ethics and compliance officers. But the topic was KPIs. So the KPIs that you need to run your business, and to do a presentation about that with PwC and Microsoft to chief ethics and compliance officers who report to their boards, there was a lot of interest. And it tied into one of our differentiators as a software company at the time, which was we had this really cool dashboard where you could configure and see your KPIs and your performance in real time. That was a competitive differentiator for us. So while we weren't selling our software actively, we were talking about KPIs. We would show examples of those KPIs, and it just happened to be, our software. So we found that to be, really effective way is combining those brands and also just a topic that folks were really interested in. But I think, and by the way, if anybody listening in has any questions, feel free to ask them in the chat. We'll keep our eyes out for them. And one of the things that we were just, I think, leaning into something that Maddie, you're starting to talk about is how does sales get involved? How can marketing and sales collaborate on events? Because I think of any of the, with digital, sales is less involved, but when it comes to events, it's very much a partnership and collaboration between sales and marketing. So any thoughts on how to make that work, Maddie?
Yeah, absolutely. I think there are a couple of things that you can do to get sales engaged. One, if you're doing an in-person event, maybe send the sales rep there. Maybe they're not the presenter because they're not that SME necessarily, but they could be on site to help answer questions that your customers or prospects have that are there. And I think that can help with getting sales to believe in what you are doing as well. I think the other thing is a lot of times we can see a split between marketing and sales a little bit, where marketing is figuring out leads and sales is like, but I need to hit my quota. So it's like, how do you connect those two things at the end of the day? And really it is the follow-up strategy from this event. So we've got all these leads that came to the event. That's awesome. How are we now going to get them into a conversation with sales? And that is the follow-up piece. So I think one thing that is super important just in general is email follow-up from sales to the people who actually attended. So the way that can look, it doesn't have to be a sales pitch. Again, we're adding value, right? So sending that recording of the webinar or following up with some best practice documents that you have on site from a content perspective in that email back to people who've attended and say, hey, thank you for attending this event. Because you're interested in X, Y, and Z, here are a couple other resources that we have that we think could potentially help you. I'm here if there's anything you need. If you are interested in talking a little bit more cyber, we're happy to have a conversation with you about your company's needs and then go from there. And that's really how you can hook somebody and engage them, but also connect what marketing is doing and what sales is doing, because at the end of the day, we're all in business to drive revenue, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you brought up something that's important there, which is the before, during, and after, because an event is just not that one point in time. Before, it's important to do the recruiting right. During, you want to make sure the experience is great, and then that follow up afterwards. One of the tactics we've seen that's worked well has been regional roadshows, which MSPs and even large companies can do for $2,000 to $3,000 for a regional roadshow. And you can get 20 to 30 people there, a mix of prospects and customers. Like to have perhaps 30 to 40% customers, and then 50 to 60% or 60 to 70% prospects. It's always nice to have customers there because they can be your best champions, and also, unfortunately or fortunately, more credible than you are at selling your services to other prospects. But what you can do is have sales recruit to that event, and it's a different conversation when a SDR, a business development rep, or a sales rep reaches out. Instead of just trying to sell, they talk to that prospect and say, look, we have this event coming up. We think it'd be really valuable for you to attend because we have another company that's like you, that's dealing with some of these challenges, and they're going to share a case study about what they did and how they solved it. And of course, you'll get a chance to meet other companies and other owners like yourselves, and we'll have lunch, or we'll have happy hour at the same time. So that's a much more fun conversation for a biz dev rep to have than just, hey, can I schedule a demo or an assessment with you? And then at the actual event, you can have that existing customer talk about their case study or their best practice, and you can facilitate that conversation. And then afterwards, perhaps do a 1 hour or 2 hour facilitated workshop between some of your employees, some of your customers, and prospects, just talking about a common problem they all have and what they've done to solve that problem. And so by doing that, everybody gets to know each other a little bit better. They open up about their problems, they share some best practices, and they're gaining value. You've facilitated this event, and you're helping these prospects and customers network with each other and also get value on best practices. So because you've given to them, they're more interested in developing the relationship with you, and hopefully purchasing services from you as well. But Maddie, this has been another great conversation. Anything else you want to add before we wrap up?
I think the only other thing that I want to add is I feel like 25 minutes is not enough to talk about all of the things that you need to do to
25 minutes is not enough to talk about anything in marketing, Maddie.
No, I know. So we're giving you just a little bit of a taste, but we do have an amazing university course available to ConnectWise partners that has templates on exactly what you need to do when an event's coming up, checklists to make sure you've got everything marked off, a timeline for when you should start recruitment, when you should be doing everything. So I think that I would definitely recommend checking that out. It's of course like totally unlocked to ConnectWise partners and in the university, but definitely a huge opportunity to start to use those resources and get started with your first event. Again, I think we always say this, but the trickiest thing is to just get started. So you don't have to be perfect, just get going and start to drive those sales opportunities.
So Maddie, before we wrap up, we have one question from Mike, who is asking, what would you recommend as a marketing strategy for a brand new MSP without a lot of budget to help land a few initial customers? I think it comes down to sales campaigns and maybe that virtual event. But what do you think, Maddie? How would you get started here? Any suggestions?
Yeah, absolutely. So brand new, I wouldn't recommend a referral program because you don't have those customers to advocate for you yet. So 100% would start with some kind of webinar. Also would start with trying to figure out from a list perspective who you can target as a whole, because a new MSP may not have a database. So just trying to find out who you can target. There are a ton of different data platforms like ZoomInfo or other opportunities like that, where you can see who maybe in your area that you want to reach out to. And then what's nice is low cost. You've got that email is free. You can use something like GlassHive, any other marketing kind of automation platform like that. That's really low cost to start to push people to that webinar as a whole. And I think always anything that you can engage somebody in, like an event, like a webinar, typically those people are a little bit more engaged with you and your brand or the topic. And so there's more opportunity for them to be able to actually turn into a sales opportunity. So starting with anything where you can get a little bit of someone's time is a really good indicator that they're likely to purchase or at least engage with you, versus just sending like emails out to a whole database, like that kind of thing. If you can find that intent, that's really where I would start. So webinar for sure, start with email to recruit for it, and then just making sure that the sales team, or if you don't have a sales team because you're a new MSP, you're the owner, you're driving, get in there, start sending emails out yourself. You don't even have to have an email platform. You can do it through Outlook or whatever you have to get started. So.
Yeah, and just to add to what Maddie said, and this is a perfect tie-in to our next month's session, which is defining and finding your ideal customer profile, which is so important, knowing who you're targeting, where you can provide the most value. So make sure to tune in next month for that. But having a very clear idea about who you're trying to target and what your differentiated value is really key. And then, as Maddie said, trying to get a list of those folks and leverage your existing relationships. Once you know the folks you would ideally like to have as a customer, that would really help your business, leverage your relationships to get intros to those people. And also think about who do those people listen to, and try to partner with them to do virtual events to talk about some of those problems, because they're going to be more interested in attending if they already have relationships or listen to those people for guidance. And then besides the list and the virtual event, as Maddie said, number 3, got to get out there and develop that business yourself. But there's a thrill to that too. And there's nothing better than feeling like you've won that deal and you're building business and you're supporting your community. But Maddie, again, love the conversation today. Really appreciate the time. Thanks everybody for joining, and look forward to seeing you next month where we talk about ideal customer profile.
Absolutely. See y'all later.
Bye.